Anne Hawthorne presents To Thaw, Spinster, a Regency short story by Anne Hawthorne, performed by Megan Hancox. Chapter 1.
Miss Lamb, that's not the right direction. East to west, remember? Like the Three Kings,
The old cook reminded her. She was right, of course. Lucy might have been the daughter of the house, usually dwelling in the realm upstairs, but here in the kitchen, Mrs. Ward reigned supreme, as she had done for decades. Indeed, it was not like Lucy to forget such a clear and vital part of preparing the plum pudding. After all, she had been taking part in this small ceremony with the other women of the household ever since she had been strong enough to hold the wooden spoon for mixing. "I'm sorry," Lucy apologized with her usual dry-eyed seriousness. "I don't know what forgetfulness has come over me."
I do,
Mrs. Ward muttered. As she was in that moment adding raisins to the mixture, her eyes were averted from the young mistress's face. As a result, Lucy Lamb did not have to struggle with the profound unpleasantness of revealing unseemly emotions on the subject of her mother's death. "I assure you, you are mistaken." Lucy gave the old cook a thin, tight smile. "As was I, on the subject of the pudding. It's fortunate that we could both correct each other's mistakes." She knew, of course, or at the very least suspected, that maintaining perfect dignity in the face of tribulations was not always possible for ordinary mortals. However, that did not mean that she was not going to make a good attempt.
Of course, you're thinking of something very different, Miss Lamb, then. Are you dreaming of some comely young man?
Mrs. Ward's face, plump and worn with heat and strain, could not have been more different from Lucy's own, young and coolly handsome. However, the cheer in her smile was just as forced. "That is hardly likely," Lucy replied, adding a prudent amount of cinnamon, "since I am not in the habit of dreaming about mirages."
"You're a ruthless one, Miss Lamb."
"How am I ruthless?" Lucy was instantly worried. Strained as she had been lately, surely she had not injured one of the Lamb's most faithful servants with any thoughtless word or deed. "Have I said something to hurt you? Please tell me if so."
"Not me. Never me. But for your own, to hear you speak of your life and future, I swear I could have thought you were cursing an enemy. You are young and comely and well-born. Why on earth should there not be a fine suitor for you one day?"
"There should be, of course," Lucy agreed with stoic placidity. There was a measure of truth in the words, if one dissected them for meaning. There indeed should be a suitor for her one day, fine or otherwise, unless she wanted Blackheath Priory to go to some distant cousin thrice removed upon her father's death. If anyone hinted at the subject, Mr. Lamb always claimed he was as strong as an ox. However, it was not easy to deceive people who knew one all too well. It was almost impossible to deceive a daughter who, thanks to the nursing of her bedridden mother through the years, was well versed in the signs and tongues of ill health. There indeed should be a suitor for her, if she were to save her home from a dismal fate. Whether there would be, of course, was another question entirely.
"We are almost at the dearest part of the pudding,"
Mrs. Ward said, looking a little more cheerful now. "You remember my childhood fascination, I see."
"It's hard to forget. You always caught your breath so when the chops went into the bowl, and watched all the guests with such a glint in your eye when the pudding was served."
"I suppose I was guilty of some morbid curiosity," Lucy allowed. "I wanted to see who would bite on the ring and who on the thimble." The ring was a small band made of the lowest quality silver. Lucy buried it in the sweet-smelling mixture with all her usual thoroughness. The coin, one to promise whoever bites on it prosperity in the new year, was the second to drown. For a moment, Lucy felt an undignified pang of fear. Perhaps she should refrain from putting the thimble in. What if she were the one to bite on it? Supernatural threats aside, she could imagine the quiet humiliation. However, rules were rules, and Lucy Lamb believed in following them. She also believed in playing fair with fate. After a pause, the small thimble, a promise of thrift and, most of all, spinsterhood, went in with the other charms. "What on earth happened?" Mr. Lamb glared at his daughter, raising his gaze from the letter in his grasp. "Nothing terrible," so far as I know. I merely wanted to let you know that our first Christmastide visitor has arrived.
Let me make a guess, Lucy. Is it Mrs. Kestrel?
It is indeed.
I knew it. People are saying she is rarely the last to arrive at a gathering, whatever the gathering is. I can bet my best wig that, had she been of an age to still frequent assembly rooms, she would have graced them with her presence while the orchestra was still tuning the strings.
She has lost her husband. I would have thought that, of all the people in the parish, you would be the one to feel for her sorrow the most, Lucy said with iron serenity. Mr. Lamb glared at her again. However, it did no good. Lucy could see that the old mirror in his study was still muffled with black crape, as though Mrs. Lamb had been lowered into her grave but a fortnight ago, instead of more than a year. Whatever the peculiarities of her father's demeanour, Lucy knew that he had loved her mother dearly.
I suppose,
he grumbled, throwing the unknown offending letter back upon the desk as though it were a particularly unpleasant bill. Which it might have been, of course. However, Lucy had her doubts. I suspect these were not felicitations on St. Nicholas's Day, she noted.
They were, but expressed in the most insolent manner possible. My dear cousin is apologizing for his absence, and expressing sincere hopes that we are going to have a wonderful season, even despite our sad circumstances.
I'm sure that he meant the sadness of our hearts, not our purses.
I'm sure that you know what he meant precisely. Archibald has never cared for the sadness of one's heart. I certainly saw no sorrow on his face when his wife passed away.
She left him a fortune, Lucy observed coolly. I pity the lady in question, but I would not be surprised at his response, or lack of it. Besides, I thought you disapproved of the modern notions of excessive sensibility.
I disapprove of weeping profusely over every surge of emotion. I disapprove just as much of marrying a good wife with barely a show of regret. I doubt that she had been anything but a good wife to him. He did start courting her when she was barely out of the schoolroom.
Mr. Lamb looked pointedly at his daughter.
It would be unfortunate indeed if Blackheath Priory were to go to that man.
I know. I agree, Lucy replied quietly. She was not sure how to put it into words, the feeling of having wilted, of having all vital juices drained away from her veins. It could not have had only to do with being 26, could it? Of a certainty she was no longer fresh as a daisy, but women on the very edge of spinsterhood have been known to marry. It was something else, something she could not describe even to herself, and if she could not describe it even to herself in a manner which would have sounded rational and clear, her father would be sure to declare it an affectation.
Do you? Well, then, do not forget to powder your face well for the weeks to come. By Jove, but it is fortunate that we cannot afford a profusion of candles.
For the widow? Lucy raised her eyebrows.
Of course not. Her sons might decide to forsake the delights of London after all, and come to spend the season with her mother, however.
That was an unlikely tale, Lucy decided. Almost as unlikely as the tales in that slim volume of Margaret Cavendish her mother had so treasured. She knew when not to argue, however, and inclined her head. I will do so. To a reasonable extent, she added privately, as she often did. Gilbert was tired, and for the first time since setting out on the journey, he wondered whether he should not have chosen to travel by stagecoach. However, he dismissed the thought quickly. For one thing, the years of fighting on the continent had accustomed him to journeys without a shred of comfort. For another, it felt peculiarly like a defeat, or, in a more pious view, a surrender to temptation, to choose the softer, easier way now. He was on something of a quest after all. Heroes and stories his mother had once read to him did not travel by stagecoaches. The name of the inn was appropriately mythic, though he doubted the garish sign depicted the Lady of the Lake particularly accurately. On the other hand, he judged, Cornwall was the cradle of most Arthurian legends, wasn't it? In other words, they were likely to know better. From the continent. The innkeeper nodded at Gilbert's uniform, nodding sympathetically. Indeed, fresh from the ship. Glad to see you're hearty and well, Captain. A mere lieutenant, alas, Lieutenant Gilbert Marston. But I am very glad to be hearty and well myself. Gilbert paused. Hungry though he was, there were things more important than the appetizing heat of the roast now set in front of him.
And your family?
My son fell in that damnable adventure in Egypt. Forgive me, Lieutenant. I forgot myself.
Why not?
Gilbert assured him.
I'm no sweet lady to be protected from harsh words. It was indeed a damnable adventure. At least the grandees and Amiens have finally agreed on something.
Your family will be mighty pleased to see you, I wager?
The old man took a different topic, one that was clearly further from the blood in the nerves. Gilbert looked down.
It is not my family that I am joining for Christmas,
he said.
My friends, rather. If they will have me. They didn't reply to my letter after all.
He swatted the unwelcome thought away as though it were a fly.
Forgive me. You have no kin living, then? That's harsh, especially for a man so young.
No, not at all. That is, my family is as well as me, likely better. My parents are alive, as are my brothers and sisters. It is only that the road to London is long, and it is there that my father works. And wheels and deals, unless something has changed greatly in his nature.
The innkeeper frowned at him, clearly not swallowing the clumsy excuse. Thankfully, another part of Gilbert's confession caused his interest.
Works, eh? So he's not one of those genteel folk?
Gilbert actually smiled at that.
No, but by Jove, he would have given much to change that.
His business I won't pretend to know, but there's nothing wrong with putting in a good day's work. Nothing wrong with our lambs, of course, but some of those, if half of what my granddaughter reads in those gossip papers is true.
It is actually to the lambs I am going, to call upon them to give them my felicitations. I would have reached Blackheath Priory tonight, but I did not want to presume upon their hospitality so deep in the evening. Better if I spend the night in your fine establishment and approach them tomorrow.
That'd be right.
The innkeeper nodded.
They'd need some peace and quiet, I wager, what with their loss.
What loss?
Mr. Lamb's wife went to meet her maker, poor lady.
I am sorry to hear that.
Gilbert really was. He could recall Mrs. Lamb as a sweet-natured woman, full of curiosity, and even possessed a vivacious character. Now that he thought of that, he could see where her daughter had inherited some of her fine qualities from.
Was it a sudden death?
No, of a surety not. All those physicians and surgeons have been going to and fro that great house for years.
Gilbert wondered if it was consumption, or perhaps some manner of tumour that had sapped the lady's life away. However, he thought it undignified to gossip about the diseases of a woman's flesh, at least when the woman in question had been neither his relative nor his wife. Though, had things been different, she might have been his mother-in-law. Had he been a better, more obedient son? Had he been a less scrupulous man? Gilbert pushed the unwelcome thoughts away. One would have thought his sheer bone-tiredness would have kept them well away as it was.
It must have been very hard for her daughter, he said. Doubtless it was she to whom the duty of nursing her mother through her final moments fell.
Especially since, by the sounds of it, those final moments lasted years.
I suppose so. With no husband, too, is a hard fate. She still has her father, I suppose. But Mr. Lamb, well, he's a fine gentleman, but he's only a dozen years younger than me.
For some reason, Gilbert was not surprised at hearing that Lucy Lamb had not married. That was peculiar, if one thought of it, for one should have expected the opposite. After all, years had passed since they had last parted, and it was not as though they'd had an understanding. Quite the opposite. Chapter 2. Lucy was ruffling through the formidable pile of sheet music which had accumulated in the house from, it seemed, the time that the first such a sheet had left the first printing press. She needed to find some carols for the guests to enjoy, modern enough to be of interest, as well as genteel enough to contain no saucy lyrics or innuendos. That means nothing from the days of the Restoration. The task took quite some time, and she was glad to find some good examples. She was just passing through the hallway on her way to the drawing-room, the music sheets of While Shepherds Watch Their Flocks at Night, from the days of Queen Anne and her strange fascinations, but otherwise very decent, in her hand, when she heard voices from the doorway. The maid has answered the door, and was now talking to the unknown visitor. In another time, Lucy would have been slightly embarrassed that they now had to delegate a maidservant to admitting the guest, instead of having a footman to do it. But in that moment, she was too alarmed to fret about such things. She did not recognize the voice, and it clearly belonged to a young man. Was it one of those local apprentices or farmers' boys, come to expect remuneration for cow singing? But such merry, hopeful groups usually only came in the evening. Then, unable to restrain her curiosity, Lucy came closer to the doorway and felt utterly struck. The man in question, his silhouette framed by the fresh snow-bound landscape outside, was not a stranger. Indeed, it was someone she had once known very well.
"Lieutenant Gilbert Marsden?"
the maid asked.
"I'm afraid I've heard of no such person."
But Lucy had. Feeling as though grasped by a strange trance, she stepped closer still. The man, his dark red hair and grey eyes just as she had remembered them, looked at her over the maid's shoulder. He said not a word for a moment, but she could see how transfixed he was. She could see the reflection of her own dark figure in his pale eyes, as though they were still mirrors meant, in that second at least, for nothing else.
"Mr. Marsden,"
Lucy addressed him. The vowels rolled easily off her tongue. It was not yesterday when she had last said that name, nor a year ago. However, it might as well have been.
"This is quite a surprise."
"I see that my letter has gone astray, then."
Although the maid had stepped aside, clearly having realized that this was no dangerous stranger, Gilbert Marsden did not take a single step inside.
"Such things happen, of course.
Though even when they happen, it is surely unheard of to invite oneself if one receives no reply," she thought privately. Unless... A realization struck her. Unless he had nowhere else to go. "Is your family well?" Lucy asked him bluntly.
"They are in good health, as far as I know."
"What about good concord?" This was straining the limits of politeness, especially since Mr. Marsden was still standing on the doorstep, clearly, Lucy realized, expecting her own permission to come in. She stepped to the side and inclined her head, indicating just that. With unspoken gratitude, Gilbert Marsden walked in and replied,
"This is a complicated question, Miss Lamb, and deserves a long answer. However, if my presence is straining to you, I would not mind accompanying to the Lady of the Lake. It has proven a most comfortable inn."
Lucy smiled a little at the notion that Blackheath Priory could be overflowing with guests. The man she had once called a friend must have truly separated himself from all news of this place. "Not at all," she said. "I need to ask my father's permission, but I am sure that he would be delighted to host you. He would definitely approve you as a guest."
"Miss Lamb? Approve of me? By Jove, has there been a revolution in the years of my absence?"
Lucy felt her cheeks heating a little with merriment she was unaccustomed to. Mr. Marsden was not wrong. Her father really had thought him, and all of his siblings, to be the progeny of a vulgar Ivist. She had ever disagreed with this opinion. Mr. Marsden the elder might have made his fortune in the city, of course, and his name shone brighter in the banking circles than it did among the patronesses of Almack's, but none of his children had ever wanted for courtesy. Neither, now that she thought of it, had the head of the family himself or his wife. "Not a revolution, perhaps," she said, "but there has certainly been some change in circumstances."
"Perhaps we call it a thawing of reforms."
Lucy herself would have rather thought of it as the bleak desolation which coats the countryside after a war. However, these were no words with which to greet a guest, whatever the history between you. Therefore, she laughed lightly, even though the heat in her cheeks no longer felt quite as merry. Gilbert Marsden set himself to the task of unpacking his own trunks out of his habit acquired during the campaign. It took him a few minutes to realize that such an action could be offensive to the Lamb's manservants. After all, they might think it stemmed from his doubts in their capabilities. Therefore, he stopped his efforts and waited patiently for one of them to arrive. However, when a not inconsiderable amount of time had passed, and no such thing happened, Gilbert could not help but wonder. The servant who had opened the door to him had been, likewise, a maid, not a footman. He thought little of it then, and dismissed the slight surprise he did feel. After all, it might have been merely a chance. However, what if it had not been so? Deciding that the trunks were going to wait a while, Gilbert decided to set out upon a journey of exploration. He knew Blackheath Priory fairly well, having spent hours exploring the corridors with his younger siblings, and, of course, with Miss Lamb, who was then merely Lucy, their proud guide. Gilbert recalled their pleasure, his younger sister Cecilia fascinated by the knightly armour, her twin sister Philippa gazing with wide eyes at the pearl-heavy gowns of the ladies in the portraits, Frederick insisting rather forthrightly on seeing the library right away. Jerome, being too little, had not accompanied them at the time. It did not hurt that, in the years among the fields of carnage, Gilbert kept seeing the ancient, well-ordered halls of the Priory in his dreams. Part of it was because, for him, it had always embodied the tranquil green heart of the country, for all that it was located not that long away inland from the rocky Cornish coast. The other part was Lucy. It did not take him long to locate the old gallery, the place of dark wood and black and white floors. At the first glance, it appeared to be as stately and serene a place as it had been in Gilbert's memories, indeed in his dreams. The suits of armour were here, so were the portraits with their pale faces and paler ruffs around paler necks. However, something was not quite right. Gilbert traversed the gallery once, twice. Then he realized what the discrepancy was. Some of the portraits were missing. The remaining brethren had been hung cunningly enough for the lack not to be obvious. Indeed, those who had never been in this place, or had only given it the one polite glance of an indifferent guest, would not have even noticed it. However, Gilbert was neither of these things. Therefore, the more seconds passed, the more obvious the change became to him. Indeed, now he could almost recall which of the portraits were not here anymore. There was that formidable Tudor dowager, a lady-in-waiting to Jane Seymour in her youth, painted by Hilliard in her declining years. She was conspicuous by her absence now, having left the halls she had overseen for centuries, doubtless mostly with disapproval. Then there was that civil servant, black-clad and shadow-like, who Lucy once proudly claimed helped to oversee the bloodless succession from Elizabeth to James. Cecilia found the fact that he had married a Scottish lady to be quite romantic. Philippa judged cuttingly that it must have helped the efforts around the union with the lady's country. They were nowhere to be found now. Don't jump to conclusions, Gilbert reminded himself. It might well be that both old grandees were now in some painter's workshop in Falmouth, being cleaned and cared for, perhaps even restored to their former glory. However, Gilbert did not truly believe that. If one took the disappearance of the valuable pieces of art together with the equally mysterious disappearance of the more expensive kinds of servants, the result was a rather dire answer. He would not have survived the brutal campaign had he not trained himself to never ignore the results of the alchemical marriages of fact and intuition. Blackheath Priory was going through difficult times, and had been doing so for a while. Lucy buried her animosity towards the unexpected guest deep in her soul. It was a childish thing to hold on to, she reminded herself, and she was well past the years of being a child. Or, indeed, even a particularly young lady. She was surprised that she even still felt any animosity to start with. "I do apologize for the modesty of our supper," she told Gilbert Marston, who was sitting by her side at the dining table.
"I would not call it modest. The wild fowl is very fine, to say nothing of the swan. Your cook should be very proud of her currant jelly sauce. If she is not, she ought to be."
"I will pass your compliment on to her." Lucy was no fool. She could guess that the praise was really meant for herself. But why so? It was not as though they had parted on the best of terms. Why try to charm her now? You had not parted on any kind of terms worth the name, her memory reminded her. He simply stopped associating with you and joined the army soon afterwards. Indeed, why are you so sure that the fault is his, and not some mishap of yours that pushed him away? Because, Lucy thought, if I put this burden too upon my back, my spine would break and I would collapse in an unseemly heap upon this Aubusson carpet.
"I have heard that you have encountered a lot of difficulties lately,"
Gilbert Marston continued. "What kind of difficulties?" Lucy tensed up.
"I mean your mother's passing, of course." I know that she was a most able woman when it came to the running of her husband's estate.
What was he saying? Did he suppose the estate was going to go to ruin because her mother was no longer there to work with the ledgers? By Jove, her poor mother had been in no fit state for such work for years. If it were not for Lucy herself, the state of Blackheath Priory would have been far worse than it was now. She was, yes. I believe that she trained me very well. At the very least, I took great care to learn from her.
I never doubted your talents.
He sounded sincere. However, his next words put paid to this impression.
I am certain that you would be a wonderful helpmeet to any husband with an estate to manage.
Was abandoning their friendship years ago not enough? Was he now intent on hurting her? Perhaps she really had done something unspeakable all those years ago, and her memory was simply playing tricks, not allowing her to remember what it was. Gilbert Marston was no tulip of fashion. Neither was he particularly interested in the intricacies of the lady's garb. Indeed, the only lady for whom he ever felt such great tenderness was now sitting next to him, and he had sought her company when they had both been young enough for her to wear short frocks. However, even he could tell that Lucy Lamb's gown could be best described as indifferent. An unkind person would have called it dowdy. His sister, Cecilia, had ever preferred clothing which was more practical than ornamental, had her riding habits made with fewer fripperies, and made the work of laundresses much easier by refusing to indulge in the fashion for pure white muslin. There was a difference, however, between that and dressing for a supper at a country house party like a quiet chaperone meant to never be noticed.
"Forgive me for my plain speaking,"
he said. She stared at the larks on her plate, looking pale and withdrawn. Did he blunder? He had never been the most gracious soul in any company.
"I have not been in genteel company for a long time."
Of course. The smile did not quite reach her eyes. You were fighting the French. That must have been a terrible ordeal.
More terrible for them than for me. Or, at least I hope so.
I imagine so, given that you are the one sitting here now, Lucy Lamb observed dryly. I say, you must have conversed with officers of the best families. Would you say that their households are still serving their suppers in the same way as us, with a multitude of dishes served together?
If I am to be honest, table arrangements were not at the forefront of our thoughts. But I imagine so. Is there any other way?
I've heard that some have adopted the simple approach of serving a single course of soup, then fish, then meat. I wondered if it were famous enough abroad that we could adopt it here, in Blackheath Priory, without attracting censure. Were it anyone else, Gilbert would have told her that, censure or not, this new method of serving one's guests sounded rather penny-pinching. But that was not what one told a woman who, it seemed, was driven to penny-pinching by her circumstances.
It's admirable that you're doing so well to keep abreast of the latest fashions in hospitality,
he managed to say.
Despite being so far from London.
The same cannot be said about your family. Not regarding your efforts, that is, regarding your location. Or do the Marstons not live in London anymore?
My father would have to change his line of work to make it otherwise.
Gilbert disapproved of many things about his father, but the fact that he had earned his fortune by the dint of his own shrewdness was not one of those. That was a prejudice that his consciously genteel education could not instill in him if it had tried. And it had tried. I'm sure that he is proud of your heroics, Lucy Lamb said. Many a family would have been glad to see their son not only brave, but alive and victorious.
I highly doubt that. That is, I doubt his reaction. I'm sure that the opinion of those other families would be just as you said it to be.
You give little credit to your parents' sensibilities.
My love for my parents is exactly what it should be, he replied, growing stiff.
There were few topics that he would not wish to brave, even for the sake of Lucy Lamb gazing at him so, but this was unquestionably one of them.
But perhaps we do not always agree about everything.
Likely so, else you would not have sought our desolate hospitality so close to Christmas. A corner of Lucy Lamb's mouth quirked up. This was the first time since he'd set eyes on her all those hours ago that he had detected any kind of mirth in her.
Your hospitality is very fine.
You... She was clearly intending to say something, and years ago she would have doubtlessly said it, with her usual bold briskness too. However, now She merely sighed and finished with bleakly spoken words which she clearly had not initially intended. Your manners are likewise above reproach. Chapter 3. For a while, Lucy wondered if she had forgotten to leave the traditional candle burning in the window. The dark, snow-shining world outside remained too silent. However, when she was already on the brink of deciding to go upstairs and prepare for bed, a chorus of voices rose outside the door.
We come a-wassailing among the leaves so green.
The strange discord between the lyrics and the reality of the weather outside made her smile, as always, but also hurry. The children and apprentices going wassailing around the village would have been doing this for hours, no doubt having the greatest hopes for the welcome at the landowner's house. They were likely cold. Just as Lucy had thought, there was a group of boys and girls on the doorstep, all bundled up in clothes of coarse wool. Their faces lit up unmistakably when the door opened and they saw that they were not going to be chased away. Truth be told, this tradition of charity belonged to grander days. However, Mr. Lamb insisted that such hospitality was a duty of any master of an estate worth the name, while Lucy herself simply had no heart to deny them help. Therefore, every Christmas, the candle in the window of Blackheath Priory remained lit. The voices were discordant, but Lucy listened until the end of the wassailing song, and even made herself clap her hands afterwards. Such gifted children you are, she said. Come through this door to the side. Our cook will be expecting you. You shall be fed and given something to take home. You can also ask her for some syllabub, she added on impulse. The sugar and cream of the drink were unlikely to be particularly useful from the standpoint of pure practicality, but even Lucy had to sometimes admit that treats had their place, at least when it came to others. The children voiced their gratitude and disappeared in a patter of feet. Lucy breathed out, closing the door against the encroaching cold darkness of the world outside.
That was a very good thing to do,
her erstwhile childhood friend said, stepping out of the shadows of the hall. There was a flash of fear on Lucy Lamb's face. It could have been ascribed entirely to surprise, except that it had not faded once she recognized him. You ought not be here with me, Mr. Marston, she replied, visibly composing herself, the brittle porcelain mask sliding into place. It might be misconstrued.
I assure you, I have no intention of harming your reputation. I only chanced to hear the singing, and then your voice.
He stumbled, as though a callow boy once more.
You are kinder soul than many.
It was my duty. We help the wassailing ones every year, as every landowner does.
Not every landowner, believe me.
Gilbert rarely agreed with his father, but the latter did have some choice and arch words about the people who reap the rewards of great land and give nothing to its inhabitants in return.
That was why my family never committed to buying a country estate, and leased one instead. They knew that they could not perform their duties as owners, given where their life usually takes them.
Your father is a very conscientious man, then.
I've never before thought that word suitable to be applied to him, and I do wish sometimes that he had bought an estate in Cornwall.
So that we could be neighbours? A pale smile touched Miss Lamb's lips.
Yes,
Gilbert answered sincerely. You've never shown a great desire to be our neighbour before.
Have I not?
Gilbert exclaimed in genuine surprise.
I cherish the memories of our friendship, and I hope that I'm not deceiving myself in thinking that you enjoyed my brothers and sisters' company too.
I did. I enjoyed your company too, Mr. Marston. It was the frankest admission of their earlier association that she had allowed herself since his arrival. However, he sensed a shadow.
But
you seem to have ceased desiring mine.
This is most certainly not true.
You stopped writing to me. I might not be brilliant, but I'm no fool. I could understand what it meant.
It did not mean that my affections for you waned.
Then what did it mean? Should he tell her the whole truth? Gilbert wondered. She seemed to hold his family in high esteem. What if the reality of their cold calculations would strike her hard? She was already looking wraith-like enough. There were shadows under her eyes and a pallor to her look. As for her figure, she had always been thinner than the conventional visions of plump and rosy loveliness, but never as thin as now. No, Gilbert decided. If the recent past had not been kind to her, Let her at least keep the memories of the distant one as an untainted comfort.
That I wanted to make something of myself in the world, and the life of a man at war hardly allowed one such opportunities of correspondence, especially with a lady who was not your intended.
Was there a lady that you called your intended? It sounded like polite interest, but he could see the white in her knuckles.
No, there was not.
Is there one now?
There is not.
She must have caught something in his tone, because Miss Lamb's next suspicious question was, "Do forgive me for prying, but has there been a tragedy?"
Why would you think so, Miss Lamb? Life does not need grand tragedies to unfold as it does.
You might have come from a family whose fortune was made in the city, but you are still a man of standing youth and gentlemanly education, Lucy Lamb said bluntly. These things usually help in finding a wife.
You are as frank as always.
More frank than before, you mean? I could have hardly spoken so as a young lady.
You are still young, and I know that you will never cease to be a lady.
You've never been a flatterer before.
I take some pride in the fact.
Lucy Lamb smiled a little, standing perfectly still in the murk. You've been entirely correct, Mr. Marston, when you observe that life is rarely ruled by grand tragedies. I'm glad that you've learned that. As far as I recall, you were too devoted to Richardson's novels of sensibility once.
I did not mean you. A parent's death is a grand tragedy.
It was not my mother's death that turned me into what I am now. It was her life. The last years of her life, I should rather say. I remained her devoted nurse, as is a daughter's duty, from the beginning to the end.
They should have commended you for it.
They did. In the beginning. But then years passed. I could hardly visit assembly rooms, for she was my only chaperone. Our family, as you well know, is not large. A journey to Bath would have been beyond her strength. We did undertake travels to the seaside to fortify her, but my thoughts on those occasions were only of her state, and my place remained by her side. It is hard. Her voice rose and fell, and ceased for a moment before she continued. It is hard to see when and where it was that my youth and vigour started to drain away. I know only that drain away they did, and when they did, I was without a friend. The tone of those last words was hard to mistake for anything gentle, and her gaze at him was full of accusation.
Miss Lamb, I am sorry. I would have come to your side had I known. I would have tried to be of help.
There was only one kind of help you could have given me, Mr. Marston, Lucy said quietly, walking past him, her skirts whispering on the floors of the ancient stone. And you chose to withhold it. Chapter 4. Lucy knew that it was impolite to be so distracted from her guest, especially since she was supposed to be the one showing them the snowbound gardens. However, she just could not help but glance up from time to time to see if she could glimpse her father watching them all from the window of his study. She had little doubt that watch them he did, and that his claim of being too busy to perform this duty was nothing more than an excuse to leave her with an eligible visitor. Not entirely alone, of course. Coarse though Mr. Lamb sometimes was, he was not entirely oblivious to the rules of propriety. The widowed Mrs. Kestrel was accompanying Lucy and Mr. Marston as a silently acknowledged chaperone. Lucy was no fool. She knew that the suggestion of this little tour was meant to give Mr. Marston an opportunity to court her. However, she highly doubted that he was going to take it. One could bring a horse to water, but one could never force it to drink. Lack of actual genteel background aside, Mr. Marston was still heir to a large fortune, unless his relationship with his father had frayed indeed. Lucy could not help but still wonder about the reason for his presence here, and not with his family. Besides, he was now a military hero, one who had returned from fighting the French with all his limbs intact. He was not going to lack for young misses setting their caps at him at any ball he might choose to attend, in any assembly rooms. Their past friendship aside, why on earth would he have been interested in a snappish, fraught, overtired woman on the very brink of spinsterhood? Had his reason for leaving her been indeed good, and not something shameful enough to be kept a secret, surely he would have named it last night, would he not?
I do wonder, Mrs. Kestrel said, if young people such as you play the game of move all chairs. I recall that my husband was very fond of it when we were both your age.
I might be able to answer, Lucy said, if I knew the rules in any detail. Would you mind explaining them to us? She fibbed, of course. She knew the rules, because her parents had both been fond of it in their own halcyon days. However, Mrs. Kestrel was her guest, and Lucy knew that one always ought to honour one's guest. Oh, it is very easy. The chairs are arranged in a big circle. One player, one only, standing at the centre of the circle, commands his peers to move all. Everyone rises up and dashes for another chair. The unfortunate or clumsy soul left without one takes the centre for the next round. It is marvellously vivacious, I remember that. I am sure that it was. Though I suspect some gentlemen valued it for the opportunity to accidentally collide with the lady who had won their affections, and vice versa. What a cynic you are, Miss Lamb, Mrs. Kestrel reprimanded her. Lucy's first impulse was to argue, to claim that she was merely a woman who looked at the world through the clear glass of realism. She was not sure where such an impulse even came from. Usually she smothered these easily. Perhaps it was the excitement of yesterday's late evening conversation which had left her mind agitated. She pushed aside the impulse now, too, and apologized and said, "Do forgive me. I'm not usually this jaded." "As for me, I prefer quieter parlour games." Gilbert Marston, who had so far been observing the still gardens as though seeing them for the first time, spoke up suddenly. "I suppose it is something of a family trait." "Hardly," Lucy challenged him. "What about Miss Cecilia? In my memory, she has always been something of a hoyden, unless she has left those boisterous ways behind."
"I wish," Mr. Marston chuckled. "As it is, she has instead learned to hide them better. Her sister has always had a natural gift for decorum, even a stricter one than our mother perhaps expected. As for me and our brothers, I'm afraid that we are all dull creatures. My favourite parlour game has always been I Love My Love with an A. It is perhaps a more natural thing for you to play, Miss Lamb. You have never lacked for good words."
"Hardly. I might turn a decent phrase in a letter, but Frances Burney I am not." Lucy paused, then asked, unable to contain her curiosity, "How is one supposed to play it?"
"It is not a difficult thing," Gilbert Marston assured her. "Each player takes a letter and creates a short and simple verse about their supposed sweetheart, where all the nouns ought to start with the letter in question. Let me show you. I love my love with an L, because she is lovely, but I do dislike that she is languid. I took her to Lisbon, to Elena Lissam Limes. I treated her with lemons, and her name is—"
There was a silence no longer than a regular gap between breathing in and breathing out. However, Lucy's head grew lighter during that time, almost frighteningly weightless, as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice, fraught with a sickening longing for the expanse beyond. Then Mr. Marston finished the phrase.
"And her name is Letitia Lester."
The world grew its normal weight back. The landscape regained its colourless solidity. The fear was no more, but so was the expanse. "That does seem an amusing game," Lucy managed to say. Was it the kiss of the frost, or was her former friend's face really touched with a flush? She looked at him not without suspicion. Had a young lady offered such a verse, even as a way of explanation to a gentleman, Lucy would have certainly thought her to be setting her cap at him. She was clumsy and unpractised when it came to men and their ways of showing interest. However, Lucy thought back to yesterday's conversation. What could have precipitated such change? Her final words, perhaps, she realized. Her rather frank hint at the understanding they could have had. She should have been glad that he was evidently trying to mend what had been broken. Even if he was only doing it for reasons of guilt, a suitor was a suitor. Beggars cannot be choosers, and when it came to marriage, Lucy Lamb was aware that she was a beggar indeed. Therefore, she forced herself to smile, and looked at her former friend with the closest approximation of a coquettish smile she could imagine, and say, "I say, you do have to tell me more about your time in the army. Since I have been deprived of your letters, I really know very little about it."
"I doubt you would be very interested, Miss Lamb. Believe me, I can bring you very few tales of Homeric glory.
You are, as ever, thinking too little of yourself. I'm no bluestocking, as you well know, but I quite like to be aware of the events around me. She paused, as though the words surprised her as much as they did anyone else. That is, I have lived in a stark isolation for a rather long time. I would like to have at least a morsel of the world beyond the Priory.
Had some guest from the centuries past heard your last words,
Mr. Marston said gently.
he would have thought you to be a gentle cloistered nun.
That mysterious guest, Lucy thought with grim vehemence as sudden as her earlier admission, would not have been far from the truth. You are trying to shift the topic away, I see.
Only because there is nothing of note to tell.
Tell me at least where have you fought? He sighed, closing his eyes for a quick second. In the corner of her own eye, Lucy could see Mrs. Kestrel shaking her head with disapproval. The younger woman could guess that she could expect a grumpy talking to later on. Something about the fact that the widow had certainly never harangued her husband like that when he was still alive, and he was already her husband at that.
Holland,
Mr. Marston said at last.
the Batavian Republic.
This close to home? I thought of Egyptian sands, or perhaps the Alpine passes.
A woman of sensibility, after all?
Do not tease me so.
As I've said, it was all singularly unromantic.
But fruitful, of course. Lucy tried to raise his spirits. You have helped to accomplish great things. However, her words seemed to have had an opposite effect, for Gilbert Marston looked away from her swiftly. Whichever doubts and demons were gnawing at his mind, she was not going to coax them into the open here among the wintry trees. It was one of those sleepy, entranced afternoon hours when Gilbert set his foot in the house's library. Like everything in this country estate, it had an air of genteel neglect. The stacks and shelves were neat enough, but he could see a layer of dust on both, and the ink in the inkwell upon the desk had long since dried. Fortunately, he had long since got in the habit of travelling with his own small supply. The sheet of paper in front of him was as pure and white as the winter garden of this morning. But while his and Miss Lamb's footsteps had trailed shadowy patterns on the paths there, he had little idea of what marks to put on this particular expanse. Perhaps it would truly be better to simply say nothing, he reasoned. A sound of whispering skirts proved a welcome distraction. He turned away from the desk almost eagerly, and saw Lucy Lamb standing facing one of the bookcases, her back to him. Her dark hair was pinned up in a plain and tidy fashion. It left her neck partly exposed and vulnerable, a patch of creamy skin visible just above the dull bombazine of her dress. She gathered several volumes from the shelf, turned to go, and looked right into his eyes. The fact that she was not alone, indeed that she had been watched, seemed to startle her, for she stumbled, the books raining down upon the floor around her. Without a thought, Gilbert jumped up from his chair and ran towards her, kneeling by her side as she sought to gather the books up. "It is nothing," Lucy Lamb said, her breathing a little heavy, and her cheeks flushed most becomingly. "Only 3 little tomes. You did not have to bother."
I think that I very much did,
Gilbert argued, taking the last of the books in his own hands.
After all, I was the one who startled you as though you were a deer.
Does that make you a hunter? She smiled slightly, but did not contradict him any further. Instead, she walked slowly by his side, nodding at the bookcase which was originally destined to receive the tomes. "Thank you. They had been misplaced, and I do dislike confusion."
Hopefully a less despondent hunter than Wyatt's.
Gilbert nodded at the book on top of the small stack, a collection of Tudor poetry, Thomas Wyatt's name prominent on the list. For a second, Lucy seemed confused. Then she almost laughed with relief. "Oh, I remember it now. Whoso lists to hunt. The hunter and his white doe. Mother read it to me when she was still well."
I did not know that it was Mrs. Lamb's gift, but I do remember that I first heard the poem from you.
"Did you?" She looked surprised anew. "I do not remember that."
It was in the gallery. You recited it while showing me and my sisters all of those antique portraits. You thought it would make a fine illustration.
"Did I?"
I think so. I'm not a man given to flattery, and I would not claim that you could have outshone Mary Robinson on stage, but your voice had a verve and a vigour to it.
At that, Lucy Lamb looked at him with such a hungry longing that Gilbert was not even sure how to react. "I wish it still had those qualities," she said.
"There's nothing to prevent you from sighting it again."
"I remember but little."
"Then it is fortunate that we have the tome right here."
"We could even go to the gallery," she proposed suddenly. "I mean, I suppose we should not, given that there would be no one to chaperone us, but—"
"We are not chaperoned now, either. A walk through the gallery would hardly be met with greater suspicion than an afternoon in an empty library."
"You are right, I suppose." As though fearing her own decision, Miss Lamb took the slim volume in one hand and clutched his fingers in the other. The strength of her grip felt desperate. She led Gilbert through the corridors until they reached the draughty gallery with its plundered glories. There she stood in front of one of the older portraits and opened the book in her hand. "Whoso list hunt, I know where's anind. But as for me, alas, I may no more. The vain travail hath wearied me so sore." If she had been no Mary Robinson in her first flush of youth, Gilbert judged, now she was not even her understudy. Her voice was quiet and unsure, and devoid of any desire to impress. It was as though she was reading the lines to some great black void, or at least was accustomed to doing so. Miss Lamb's voice carried her over the painful words of futile pursuit before finally alighting on the famous description of the doe. "Engraven with diamonds in letters plain, there is written her fair neck round about. Noi me tengere, for Caesar's I am, and wild ford hold, though I seem tame." Miss Lamb's last words were faint, quick to dissolve in the old silence of the gallery. Nothing could have been a greater contrast with the hind's supposed qualities. Nonetheless, Gilbert could not help but prod her a little.
"Are you, I wonder?"
"Am I what?"
"Wild ford hold?"
"No. Or at least, I do not know. I have never had an occasion to learn such daring things about myself. I am sure that you will understand, Mr. Marston." The daring of half an hour ago was already draining from her, just as the flush was draining from her cheeks. She turned to flee, much like the Ind. He could not grasp her wrist, he knew. That would have been too daring, downright an affront. He could call after her, however.
"I am not much of a wild creature myself, Miss Lamb. I would have thought that, of all the people on this earth, you would know that."
Lucy Lamb turned back. Not retracing any of her steps, no, but at least she was looking at him now. Her figure was wreathed in shadows. "What do you want from me, Mr. Marston?" she asked with startling frankness. "Please do not tell me that you merely wish to be an obliging house guest. If you truly wish to rekindle our friendship, I wish that you would say so. If it is something different, I would be grateful if you would share your intentions with me too."
"I want to help you, Miss Lamb. You are a woman of great and quiet strength, as you have always been, but I am a man with eyes in my head. I can see the state of the home you love. I can see the state of—"
He had to take a breath to finish this sentence.
"I can see the state of your happiness. Were all the tomes in that stack your mother's?"
"Yes. I dislike it when people throw them here, there, and everywhere. She liked them on very particular shelves."
"I remember you as the girl from my childhood. You had other desires lighting up your life then, apart from the arrangement of library shelves."
"I had not a care in the world then, yes. I believe that changing from that state means growing up."
"You do not truly believe that?"
"What on earth do you want me to say?" Her voice grew louder, catching midway. "That my life is miserable? That I have been entombed alive? I do not know. I suppose It is hard. It is so hard to tell. One gets used to things." Gilbert felt reckless then. Not so reckless as to come up to her and steal a kiss. He was no cad even in the most intoxicating moments, but reckless enough to whisper,
"Then I would dearly like to get you used to things more pleasant than this."
Miss Lamb did step toward him then closer and closer still. He could see the flecks of grey in her austere blue eyes. Shall She started, then stopped, clumsy as she was with the passionate poem. Started again. Am I to understand that you want to court me then?
If you would permit me to.
Because you feel sympathy for me. It was more a statement than a question.
Because I feel sympathy for you. Because I yearn for our friendship to be what it once was. Because I ache to see a smile on your face again. Because, my family apart, you are the only corner of my life worth treasuring. Because I feel a great multitude of things for you.
He did see a slight smile on her face then. Then I would permit you, Lucy Lamb said, still clutching the tome of poetry to her chest, the skin of her fingernails gone white with the strength of her grip. Gladly so. Chapter 5. It did not take long for Gilbert to reach Mr. Lamb's study. He had never felt particular affection for the cynical man who, even in his younger years, seemed to belong to the era of powdered wigs and Wunderkammern. However, the world had not yet invented a way of conducting a respectable courtship and leaving the lady's family entirely in the dark about it.
Yes?
The voice could have been less gruff, given that Mr. Lamb was talking to one of his house guests.
It is me, Gilbert Marston. There's a rather pressing matter I need to talk to you about. Heavens above, I hope there are no rats in the pantry this time.
Mr. Lamb grumbled, then opened the door to the study.
Did something happen?
I suppose.
Oh?
But none of it has been injurious to any part of the household, Gilbert added hastily, including the pantry.
Well, that's good to hear, I suppose. Come in.
He offered Gilbert a seat with a gesture, then stared at him in mute inquiry.
I come to speak to you about your daughter.
The old man beamed instantly.
You wish to ask for her hand? That's quite splendid.
The jump towards that conclusion was quite disorienting.
No, that is not yet. I only wish to ask you for your permission to court her. So, you do want to reach an understanding with her?
Of course. God Almighty willing, and Miss Lamb willing too.
Oh, come. Of course she is going to be willing. Look around you. She is not a fool.
Nonetheless, I would like to leave her choice, and some time in which to make it.
You young men these days. I blame French sentimental novels.
There's nothing reprehensible about French novels. Gilbert felt honour-bound to defend works of sensibility that he had started enjoying from the day that he had first made his way to a circulating library.
Well, look at the state of France today. They must have done something wrong along the way.
I need to say, Mr. Lamb, that I esteem your daughter most highly. Gilbert judged it was better to turn the talk to a more fruitful subject.
Oh?
I think that she is a woman of good sense, of pure heart, of immense strength.
Yes, I suppose so.
The head of the household stopped his stumbling confessions with a wave of his hand.
As long as you don't mind, she is also a woman of a not-so-immense dowry.
With all due respect, I'm not a pauper.
Well, that's good. This house would do well with some healthy injection.
Dear God, Gilbert thought. He had never met such an unfeeling parent. Did Mr. Lamb not care about his daughter's future husband's feelings for her at all?
If you say so,
he managed to utter. He needed to appear outwardly respectful.
Always good to find a young man with manners.
So I have your consent on the matter.
You do?
Gilbert turned to go, and had already taken a few steps when the elder man's voice reached him.
Except?
Yes?
I have one more question for you. What was the reason for your rift with your father?
There was no rift to speak of. He might have answered too quickly.
Tosh!
Mr. Lamb gave his verdict.
No ambitious cit worth his name would allow his eldest son to simply go away and fight the French. No more than a landed gentleman would, at least. Something happened. I want to know what.
With all due respect, that is hardly important.
I am to decide what is important and what is not. Every family has a skeleton in the closet or two, I suppose. God knows I know that. But I don't want to push my Lucy onto a fresh battlefield.
Damnation! Mr. Lamb was the last person in the world who would want to hear the full truth of the matter. Outright dishonesty never came easily to Gilbert Marsden, but he would not have been his father's son if he had never mastered at least some of the art of mixing the truth with some artful ornamentation. My enlistment was the reason for our argument. It was not the consequence of it. My father was furious when he found out.
Why did you enlist then?
I had my reasons.
Of course. Your young heart was bleeding at the thought of us losing the sphere of influence to Egypt.
Mr. Lamb's words were dripping with sarcasm. I did not fight in Egypt. The majority of my participation was the Dutch campaign.
All the more strange, then. Why did you go, Gilbert Marsden?
I wanted. He took a slow, deep breath, steadying his breathing and his voice. He had long since mostly shed his callow, stumbling way of speaking without thinking. He'd had to. The only people who could reduce him back to that state were two ladies. One of them was his mother, and the other was Lucy Lamb. I want to prove myself.
I see. Young Prince Hal in search of his Agincourt. See, my wife's reading has not been wasted on me utterly.
The elder man joked dryly. I suppose.
Did you find it?
I fought in more than one battle.
That is not what I asked. Have you found your Agincourt, your testing ground of chivalry?
Then I have not.
Just as I thought. One rarely does.
Do you find my explanation satisfactory, Mr. Lamb?
That you were a romantic fool? Not entirely. On the other hand, that was to be expected, and you seem to have left at least some of that nonsense behind. You may go and write to your family.
The elder man's shrewd blue eyes, a colder version of Lucy's, followed him.
For you are going to go and write to them, are you not? Since the reason for your rift was so innocent, and no doubt healed by your heroism long since.
Of course, Gilbert replied, not flinching. Indeed, he had to write. He had to tell them of the impending betrothal. There were rules one did not contravene. Even though he was not sure how one said, "I fulfilled your ambition, father," in a way that did not sound like a complete capitulation. Lucy Lamb had never thought herself to be the sort of giddy, impatient girl to hover just outside the door of her father's study, on the brink of listening in. Truth be told, even the word girl could hardly be applied to her now. However, that was exactly what she was doing. She was also driving her nails into the soft white flesh of her palms, leaving red half-moons upon the skin. They might not even be discussing that subject, she reminded herself. Not everything in the world is about you. In fact, very few things are, and rightfully so. However, these sensible, temperate thoughts disappeared like raindrops upon hot coals when she saw Gilbert Marsden exiting the study. Lucy looked into his face expectantly, and even, quite shockingly, clutched at his sleeve. "What did you speak about?" she whispered with such heated urgency that she barely recognized her own voice.
I asked your father's permission to court you.
Her heart leapt in her chest. And what did he say? Rationally, the answer was obvious. Her father was likely to give any eligible young man permission to court her, so desperate did he think her prospects to be. However, her nerves were deaf to obvious and rational answers. Blind, they were clamouring for confirmation.
He gave it,
Gilbert Marsden replied, his eyes on hers. Her head felt light for a second. She was happy, terribly, terribly happy, even though she knew better than others that a courtship does not always a proposal make. "I have been waiting for this for so long," Lucy uttered before she could think.
For marriage? To be the mistress of your own household, you mean?
She swallowed, and it felt like there was suddenly some bitter taste in her mouth. "I suppose so." Lucy smiled wanly. No great romantic utterances for her, then. Nor for him. Perhaps that was all for the better. There was a time when she had been ravenous for his every word, when she felt that, when he finally kissed her, she would be sure to bite his lower lip just to feel his blood upon her tongue and mix it with hers. The hunger was long gone, she told herself. She had buried it in the still winter ground. The man the hunger was for, well, he had likely never existed in the first place. It was all for the better. Friendship and sympathy, Lucy told herself, could be a better foundation for marriage than anything else. Certainly better than some false passion. As for their first parting, she would only need to dig another grave and bury that grudge there too. It was not as though she was unpracticed in the art of averting her eyes. For the last 2 weeks, Gilbert Marston had been feeling as though he were not feeding on the lamb's plain fare, but on ambrosia and honey. He had finally finished that triumphal letter to his family and sent it off as soon as he could. He was not entirely content with it, but he felt significant relief about the fact that the deed was done. He could well imagine his father's caustic lines in reply, some gloating, no doubt. However, he was prepared to bear it for the sake of Lucy. For, albeit they were not yet wed or even betrothed, that was how he took to calling her in the privacy of his mind. All his life, Gilbert Marston had been a man striving to be as straight as an arrow, his thoughts and actions a part of one clean and clear whole. However, now he found that the impropriety of so laying claim upon the woman who was not even his betrothed yet, while following all the dictates of politeness in public, did not bother him. He wondered more than once or twice as to how it would feel to lay claim to her company in truth, to call her by her Christian name in private and see her smile at that, to run his fingers through her dark hair, to relieve it of its pins that now kept it so sensibly up. He could not do so yet. He could, however, have the pleasure of her reading voice every evening. He could see her lean closer to him in the light of the winter fireplace when he told her, and the lamb's other guest, of the foreign lands he had seen during the campaign. Gilbert did his best to keep these stories cheerful, clean, and innocent of blood. He would have continued to do so, had Lucy, his Lucy, not asked him one evening as they were walking through the gallery, "May I hear the truth?"
"What do you mean?"
"I'm no fool," she murmured. "It might not be my place to pry, but I am curious. Your years overseas could not have been full of only amusing occurrences and instances of glory, or at least not to the same extent as you claim."
"I merely did not want to darken the festive evenings."
"I would rather have your true memories than a bright toy, for I am not a child, especially if—" She cut herself off ruthlessly quickly.
"Especially if we were to become a husband and wife one day."
"Yes," Lucy Lamb breathed after a short hesitation. "Yes, indeed."
"I could tell you something, but I'm afraid that I would disappoint you again, and neither of us would gain anything by that."
Gilbert was acutely aware of the seconds slipping by, of the well-chaperoned, fire-lit world that existed outside this dark chance meeting. However, uncomfortable though the interrogation was, he found himself in no hurry to rejoin that world. "Hardly."
"The truth is neither glorious nor gruesome, Miss Lamb."
A man who tended to exist in his own head more than was perhaps advisable, he had to force this outward address out of his lips. "Is it something in between, then?"
"It is neither here nor there."
"I find I am well versed in such situations." Lucy Lamb smiled a pale smile.
"I doubt it."
"I might not be the great reader that my mother was, but I have still learned to feel sympathy for characters and people whose travails are not my own."
"The Batavian campaign was a pointless and disorderly thing,"
Gilbert said quickly. The words were burning in his blood. He wanted to get it over with and done. He wanted this conversation to be over. He was on the very brink of regaining the innocence and tranquility that was his life before the war. Why did Lucy insist on bringing the latter into this oasis that it never had to touch?
"The battle at Colenso went well, but the autumn months saw our gains drain one by one. We landed in August, under the clear skies. By the time October rains came, we were back in the positions we had held in the very beginning. Only tens of thousands of good men were dead. Then came November and evacuation proper. The only thing that came out of that campaign was that General Abercrombie was voted thanks in Parliament and given an honorary sword."
"I have only heard of it a little."
"I can imagine. You had been ensconced here."
"I had been ensconced in a sick room." This was the first time he had heard such naked bitterness in her voice, or at least the first time in years. I might know little of the carnage of battle, but please, do not envy me.
It was not even the carnage.
He rubbed his eyes. The landscapes that flared up beneath his eyelids had the leaden hue of Dutch skies.
It was the senselessness of it all.
You must have fought other battles, other campaigns?
So I did. But the Batavian expedition remained the purest example of them all. You know, Plato claimed that things on earth are mere reflections of their own most perfect forms on a different plane of existence.
I'm afraid I have not read Plato. As I've said, I'm not as brilliant as my mother used to be once.
It is no wonder Cecilia was in such awe of her. But it does not matter much here. What matters is, those 3 months became like one of those perfect forms for me. The one true form of which all other combat was a pale, identical reflection.
There's peace now, Lucy added.
I suppose.
He was not sure how long the accord was going to last. His father's efforts of giving him a gentleman's education gave him a thorough knowledge of history, even more thorough, some may say, than those to the manor-born usually cared to acquire. He knew how little the heads of nations cared for promises of peace. Is that why you cannot face your father? Lucy inquired. Because you are afraid that he would be disappointed in you? The very notion startled him.
That is very far from the truth.
Then tell me the truth.
About this aspect too.
He tried to smile, to play it as a joke.
Is there not too much truth-telling for one evening, Miss Lamb? Lucy.
She responded visibly to the sound of her name upon his tongue, a blush rising on her cheeks. However, hoping to distract her, Gilbert was soon disappointed. Perhaps it is, but I would still dearly like to know. After all, if, as you say, he is to be my father-in-law.
You're striking me with my own weapon.
I am striking you with one of the few weapons I possess. Please do not tell me that he was so very against your joining.
He was.
Perhaps it was so, but I know that your abrupt stop in all contact with me came months before your volunteering.
You have always been thorough.
I hope I still am. Her pale face was streaked with shadows in this ancestral murk.
Your opinion of him is not going to be improved by what I can tell you. Perhaps neither is your opinion of me.
You intrigue me. I cannot believe there is some crime concealed. Such things belong in Gothic novels.
I am not sure how to begin.
Begin at the beginning. Had her fate been more dire than it was, it occurred to him, had her birth been less genteel, she would have made a very firm, if quiet, governess. Some mirth touched Gilbert's lips upon this thought. Not much, though.
You know that my father has always wanted to rise in this world, by his own merits, and through us, his children.
I do not know precisely, but I could guess as much. Men lacking ambition do not usually climb where he has climbed.
Several years ago, he called me to his study and revealed one particular ambition of his. He said it took him a long time to put us in the proximity of such a genteel family as yours, even more to encourage our friendship, especially since your father did not always approve.
The words, cold and precise, had etched themselves into his memory, a memory he could always call up now.
Now, he said, it was time for us to actually reap the rewards. You were a lone child, and your husband was to inherit Blackheath Priory. That was, indeed, the whole reason for his tender regard for you and your family. He
told you to try and ask for my hand, Lucy said quietly. And you, I take it, refused.
Yes.
He thought her an angel in that moment, spelling the painful words out for him. You're speaking of it as though it really were some Gothic crime from the vicinities of Otranto.
It was not. These are rare, but would you not say that the manipulating of my affection and yours for his own advantage was unnaturally glacial on his part?
Glacial, perhaps, but if it were really unnatural, so many people would not have been doing it. Mr. Marston, do you truly believe that the well-born sons of the gentry do not scheme the same schemes? Had the Kestrel's sons been older, or myself younger, they would have tried to ingratiate themselves with me the same way.
I have never tried to ingratiate myself with you,
Gilbert promised passionately.
I have always been of the opinion that, of all the things under the sky, human relations should unfold according to natural affection.
Yes, I remember that you have always been an avid reader of Rousseau, even when the news from France made his name a dirty word. A smile touched her lips, but there was something condescending in it that he did not precisely like.
All my conversations with you, all the time that I have spent here, were because I have enjoyed your company. I swear it. I did not know of my father's plans.
So you threw them in his face and joined the army? As soon as you did hear of them, that is.
Indeed I did.
And left me to shiver here alone? To tend to my mother alone? To face spinsterhood alone? He flinched. This heated rebuke was not what he had been expecting.
It would have been unfeeling to push you into a marriage for my father's sole benefit.
Unfeeling? Lucy repeated, her expression strangely dazed. By Jove, more unfeeling than breaking my heart.
I did not know that your regard for me was that high then.
You were frustrated by my inability to spell out simple truths when you first came here. I will spell one out now. My regard for you had not been high. I simply loved you. There was no other man I would have rather spent the rest of my life with. Gilbert felt a sweet, aching pain in his chest, such as that a frozen limb feels when blood rushes through the veins once more. He leaned closer to clutch Lucy's hands, all notions of propriety forgotten, when her next words came out like a slap. We could have had our marriage then. You would not have been estranged from your own family. If only you had not clung to these celestial principles that have nothing to do with life on earth.
A man without ideals is a beast on 2 legs.
Then what would you call a man without an ounce of common sense in his body? She was trembling now, but with anger rather than tears. Perhaps everyone would have wished for love to have nothing to do with property, but that is not the world we live in. It has never been thus. It's all well and good to describe wonderful vistas in print, but it's exceedingly stupid to live as though it was all real.
You knew of my views then as you do now.
He strove to keep his voice gentle. He strove to keep his countenance civil. He did not think that he succeeded in either.
Did you consider them stupid then too?
Lucy shut her eyes at this, now shivering fully. She bit her lower lip, not in anything resembling a gesture of coquetry, but in a clear, forceful attempt to prevent her next words from escaping into the air. I thought them very unwise, she said at last. But truth be told, I hoped that you were going to grow out of them.
I am glad,
Gilbert said, his tone coldly, disturbingly to his ears, resembling that of his father,
that I am going to have such a sensible spouse. No doubt you are going to prevent me from committing many a folly in the years to come.
The feeling in his limbs had nothing to do with the winter draughts of the old gallery. He tried to direct his thoughts to the world outside, the people waiting, the proprieties to be observed. These other images, however, refused to enter his mind. Even when he turned away and strode in the direction of the parlour, the only thing that remained in his thoughts, icily bright, were Lucy's disdainful eyes. Chapter 6. Is the pudding maturing well? Lucy asked Mrs. Ward. She tiptoed her way into the kitchen early in the morning, not so much because of any great urgency of the matter, as because she did not want to face any of the guests with her eyes reddish with sleeplessness.
Oh, very well, the old cook replied. I suppose you're much less worried about it.
What do you mean?
I saw your face when you were just stirring it, back when we were adding all those knickknacks to it. Now you won't have to worry about biting the thimble.
Hardly.
Oh, come. Everyone downstairs is talking about how that old friend of yours is looking at you, Miss Lamb.
Lucy forced herself to smile. She supposed that she should be grateful that Gilbert Marston's sense of obligation seemed stronger than his ire, that he did not proclaim to her his intention to cease what he was doing. Indeed, only a month ago she would have been cool-headed enough, and prided herself on it, to arrive at just such a conclusion. Marriage is marriage, she would have judged. As for love in it, it was fortunate if one found it, but it was foolish to actually be expecting it. Now, however, She could not help but feel utterly wretched. If that was what relaxing the grip on the tight reins of one's emotions gave one, she did not want it. She could have been good and proper as she had been all her life, and held her tongue, and everything would have been fine, and... Except that it would not have been. Not really. There would have still been those years she had lost. Years they had lost. Because of Mr. Marston's foolhardy ideals. Who on earth makes such a fuss out of one's parents maneuvering one towards an advantageous marriage? Goodness and propriety or not, but Lucy felt a red simmering of anger in her blood. I wonder if it would be for the better, she muttered.
Of course it would be. He's a fine gentleman, and must have fought well too.
He's not that easy to deal with. Lucy allowed herself an understatement.
Oh, Miss Lamb, very few men really are.
Perhaps in some ways, but... Can you imagine sharing your life with a man whose beliefs are so different from one's own?
What sorts of beliefs?
Mrs. Ward sounded concerned now. High-minded, I suppose. Foolhardy ones. Fine sensibility, overflowing feelings. Marriage is founded on pure sentiment.
Ah.
The cook relaxed a little.
That's not so bad. You should have seen what my late husband believed in.
And what was that? Lucy realized that Mrs. Ward had been a widow for such a long time that the existence, let alone personality, of Mr. Ward had been effaced in the shadows by the passage of time.
He had those strange ideas. Wanted to take the trouble to go to the neighbouring village every week just to visit that Methodist chapel instead of our church.
Oh, that is quite radical.
I told him as much.
The elder woman sighed.
I said, over my dead body, and you can remember that. Can you imagine what the neighbours are going to say if we stop being seen at church on Sundays? What God-fearing man would hire him then?
How did you reconcile it all? Lucy asked hesitantly.
We didn't. He died young, you see. It was a bad winter, and he decided that his cold would go away all by itself. I don't know if he ever forgave me.
I'm sure he did. It's not like you hurt him on purpose.
Maybe he did. He was a good man. But it all seems such a shoddy little argument now, if I think on it. It's not like I even disagreed with his faith. I would have gladly stopped eating meat on Fridays. And as for the pomp and dresses, we've never had much of that to begin with. But I was so afraid of what the others would say. What Mrs. Leadenhead, who was the grocer's wife, would whisper about me.
I don't think I've heard of her in the village.
You wouldn't, Miss Lamb. You're too young for that. She is long since 6 feet under, you see, with all her remarks. She is 6 feet under, and she never grew to like me, even when she still walked the earth anyhow. And I threw my family's accords out because I was so afraid of what she'd say. Well, she won't say anything now, or approve of me, or judge.
She smiled briefly, mirthlessly. Lucy nodded, as though she really could commiserate with this elder woman about the vagaries of life. As though she really knew anything about carrying pain in one's bones until it's decades old and indistinguishable from one's marrow. The folded letter delivered to him in the morning looked like a mockery, even though Gilbert knew it could not have been intended as one. Although, who knew? Perhaps it was. His father was no doubt pleased that his wayward, headstrong son had returned to the route laid out for him in advance, had seen the wisdom of his elders. Even if it did contain nothing but sincere congratulations, however, Gilbert knew they were not going to be in order. He was not going to run away because the reality was what it was, he reminded himself, gritting his teeth. He was not going to run away. He was not going to abandon Miss Lamb. But it hurt like all damnation that the woman he felt obliged to wed, for had he not left her to this locked tomb of a house for years before, was a woman with values so very alien to his own, and one who thought his own tenants to be foolish. However, he was not a boy any more. He could not push reading his father's letter away for long, After all, it would be less than a week until the 12th night ball would be upon them. He would be expected to declare himself in some way, to announce his intentions regarding Miss Lamb, if with some subtlety. Unless he decided to run away after all. After that, either he was to leave this cold country abode never to return, or to return the future master of the house. Either way, his life was going to be turned on its very axis. A week was not such a long time as all that. Screwing his courage to the sticking place, as his theatre-loving mother would have no doubt called it, Gilbert sat down at the desk and started reading.
My dear son.
The address already startled him.
I have received your letter and would like to congratulate you on the impending great change in your fate. I am glad indeed that sometimes age does seem to bring wisdom with it.
Gilbert winced, but continued reading.
Your letters to us on campaign were not frequent enough, and for that I do blame you. I had to use my other connections to find out more details about your military career. Perhaps, of course, it was merely your modesty that made you leave out so much. I know, thanks to both sources, that you have distinguished yourself in the Batavian campaign and beyond. I know some people, my associates among them, who regard that expedition as a regrettable waste. One of these men is especially disliked by dear Philippa, so I beg you not to mention his name in her presence, and, given that you, forgive me, do not have the capacity for subterfuge the Almighty gave a goose, I am not going to share that name with you. I do not agree with them. I have no doubt that whatever glory was there was won by fine young men such as yourself. Perhaps, forgive my partiality, but especially by yourself.
Gilbert startled again at that. A praise of his exploits. From his father. Him who had never referred to his enlistment as anything other than damnable foolishness.
No doubt you are now asking yourself if an early disorder of the mind has not claimed me.
The letter continued, as though reading his thoughts.
In fact, sometimes I ask myself the same. Years ago I told you that your decision to join the army was sheer madness. Truth be told, sometimes I still think so. But more and more I am coming to the conclusion that I cannot blame you for your desire to plough your own way through the world, because you have doubtlessly inherited it from me. Besides, that desire is the reason I have risen as high as I have. This desire is still fueling my blood, not to mention keeping Dorothy and your sisters in silk stockings. I know your opinion of the plan I have constructed for you. I would never claim to have secretly been driven by pure sentiment. I doubt I have ever been, even when I was myself a lad of 18. However, I can promise you that I chose the young lady for you to grow closer to only after inquiring after her character and realizing that your company was likely to bring her joy, just as hers would bring it to you. I would have lied if I said that I am not glad that your reconciliation has come at last.
Gilbert continued staring at the letter, reading and rereading the lines, until he had memorized it better than Lucy had her Wyatt, even in her bright days of early youth. The welcome, warm pain inside his chest was flaring up again, and his first instinct was to ask for good paper to write a reply on. Then Gilbert paused. His thoughts were all a jumble, a veritable cat's cradle. This was not a fit state to write letters in. More than that, he had, as he would have said but months ago, nothing to report. Nothing good, at least. Not yet. Not yet. It was still a week until the 12th night ball. It would have been a lie to claim that the ballroom of Blackheath Priory had not seen better days. Keen eyes would have distinguished the fact that the quantity of candles was not what it had been, even last year. Keen ears would have noticed that the musicians, while adequate, were not the celebrated orchestra which had played at the 12th night ball but half a decade ago. Keen tongues would have no doubt lamented that, though the 12th day cakes were tastefully decorated by the house's skilful cook, they lacked the plaster of Paris and other fine features of that ilk. However, it was the dead of winter and the snows waist high. They were in the middle of the countryside, not in the glittering society of the capital. Therefore, those local notables who had received an invitation to the ball at the Lambs thought it a very good entertainment. Lucy was more nervous than she had ever been in her life. She knew, of course, that there could be no great argument in the middle of a ballroom. Neither could there be a grand proposal. But a blow did not have to be grand to be painful. Neither did a blessing withheld have to be loud to be true. She spent the first 3 dances hovering around her father, then inquiring about Mrs. Kestrel's health, then being solicitous around other older ladies who were here before an evening. All this time she could feel Gilbert Marston's gaze upon her, burning steadily and mildly, but burning nonetheless. It was when the country dance was to start that she scolded herself for cowardice, raised her chin, and stepped closer to him.
"How fortunate,"
Mr. Marston said, as though he really had been surprised to see her so.
"Would you give me the pleasure of this dance?"
"Yes," Lucy replied quietly, words unsaid crowding her throat. "I would, with great joy." They turned out to be the first pair in the country dance, thus the ones to decide upon the tune. It took Lucy a few seconds to think up something appropriate. She looked inquiringly at Mr. Marston.
"I'm afraid that I am quite as much at a loss as you are,"
he replied, not without humour. His tone brought her some relief. "How so?" Lucy asked.
"I have not been to the theatre for a long time, loath though I would be to admit it to my mother."
"No pleasures of the town for you?"
"Few of them ever held great appeal."
It means little, Lucy told herself as she simply gave the orchestra the name of the same melody that she'd heard during the last year's ball. Many men expressed preference for the country. It did not mean they all wanted to marry her. It did not mean that they forgave easily. The dance steps they chose were simple, mostly consisting of rare hops and quick chassés. It was only when her feet started following them, and she knew that she would need no great focus to avoid treading on her partner's toes, that Lucy felt bold enough to look up in Gilbert Marston's face. It expressed nothing but pleasant courtesy at present. However, she could see the turmoil in his eyes. "I would like to apologize," she said hesitantly. "My words have been harsh. Had anyone else said them to me, I would have deemed them unforgivable. It would have been unworthy of me to expect an easier pardon for myself." Having said that, Lucy immediately shifted her gaze so as to be looking over Mr. Marston's shoulder instead of at his face. Shame was burning her, and the mortifying feeling of having shown too much of her raw essence.
"You have been harsh indeed. Had it been the matter of your manner only, Miss Lamb, I would have forgiven you 1,000 times in a minute. It is the heart of it that bothers me so."
Lucy swallowed. It was clear that he was not going to let her go lightly. I have thought of it for a long time," she murmured, leaning just a little closer than she usually leaned towards any partner. She felt the warmth of his skin through the layers of clothing and, faint though it was, it pried a yearning out of her such as she had never felt before. "I have always been the sensible one, I suppose. I am my father's daughter, and I cannot become otherwise. However many novels beloved by my mother I've read, but I don't think that if my particular faith is dear to me, everyone else's must be heresy."
"So I should not expect a crusade against my library anytime soon."
He squeezed her hand in his tighter than before. "No, indeed," Lucy murmured, her head light as though she had drunk a sea of champagne. "I think I might even prove a convert, though not an easy one."
"Easy conversions have never made anyone sainthood."
"Oh, is that what you're aspiring to?"
"No, I am no martyr to anything but my own thick-headedness."
"Surely not," Lucy protested, her rote-learned habit of smoothing gentlemen's blunders stepping in. "You have never been anything but perfectly courteous."
"Lucy."
He used her name in such a low voice that no one but the couple closest behind them could have heard.
"It is not correct manners that I am talking about. I have thought myself a sentimental hero in the world of black shadows and white light. It has been brought to my attention that I might have been mistaken."
"Might?" She could not quite hold the teasing question back.
"Was. I would not lie. It was not an easy revelation to take. Truth be told, I am still not sure how I am going to look in my father's face when we are to visit him."
"We?" Her heart leapt up in her chest.
"They know you, of course, but I cannot imagine that I could marry you without inviting them, even should I fail to appear in London before that, which I probably should not fail to do."
Mr. Marston, Lucy asked gently, swear here now that it is not the 12th night punch which has led you to this decision. He stared at her, earnest and sober as a clear glass.
I do not know what to swear by, he said, but let me tell you that in the blood and reign of Batavia, and in all the campaigns after that, when I conjured up some image of happiness that lay beyond, it was your parlour that I pictured, and yourself in it.
Lucy's lips softened in a helpless smile, and for the first time in a long time, she made no attempt to control her expression. I love you, she said just as softly. I have loved you for a long time. I thought it should freeze in the earth, but instead it took root and flowered even greater. What is to happen now?
Right now we are going to dance until the end of our steps, and give the couple behind us their moment in the sun. Then I am going to invite you for a dance again and again.
So that no one remains in doubt of our understanding?
Well, that is the great aim.
Gilbert Marston paused before adding.
The second one is that I don't think I want to dance with anyone but you until the night becomes the dawn.
Epilogue. The way from the church was not strewn with herbs or flowers, as would have been the pleasant custom of summer weddings, but Lucy knew that it being late January would have made such a thing rather difficult to achieve. Besides, she had never been a great lover of frippery. She hoped to spend the whole walk back to the house talking to her new husband. The word felt sweet upon her tongue. However, given the prodigious number of his younger siblings, such a thing was not to be.
I hope you're going to visit us in London, at least from time to time,
Miss Philippa Marston, her dark red hair hidden under a fetching bonnet, told her. The younger woman's step was measured, not hurried, but somehow she still kept up with them without a problem.
Are you sure you're not going to be bored here?
Bored?
Gilbert laughed.
I truly cannot imagine that. You have rather petit Trianon-like notions of what managing a country estate is like, Philippa.
Well, as the ancients would have said, I am a town mouse.
She shrugged.
May I ask how much you know yourself of managing a country estate, dear brother?
Not much,
Gilbert admitted.
However, I have a very sensible wife now, and I have the utmost confidence in her tutoring.
Provided you are going to be a diligent pupil, Lucy teased him.
None more so.
The other Marston siblings were walking behind still, though Lucy could hear Cecilia's high-spirited voice insisting that the species of an oak they were just passing bore this proper Latin name and not that one. Frederick, her brother, was contradicting her with equal passion. She thought of the morning wedding, of the way that she had never woken up at an early hour, still in the winter darkness, with greater joy.
You could not have done better,
her father muttered, upon taking her hand on the way to the church. Why, thank you for this high praise. Lucy could not feel truly angry. Not that day.
I don't mean it in jest. He might have a few daft notions in that big head of his, but he has a good heart.
Since when do you care about that?
Since when do I care about my only daughter being happy?
Her father raised his eyebrows.
Since I first told you, I suppose. Though that was many years ago, I might not remember.
High praise again, I see. This time she laughed.
Well, you are no debutante. I've never had a gift for pretending otherwise. You are really very fortunate, Lucy. Tongues will wag, of course, that you only married for the sake of breathing new life into the Priory.
At that, Lucy turned her face to him and said 4 words she had never imagined she would say so callously in her life. Let them wag, then. Walking along the snowy path, her hand upon her husband's arm, Lucy felt that she was more than ready to repeat them. Perhaps, she thought blissfully, I am being subtly corrupted, and my love is going to transform me into a woman of wild sensibility after all. The end. This is Megan Hancock's. We hope you've enjoyed this unabridged production of To Thaw, Spinster, a Regency short story, by Anne Hawthorne. Presented by Anne Hawthorne. Text copyright 2024 by Anne Hawthorne. Production copyright 2025 by Anne Hawthorne. All rights reserved. Thank you for listening.